Hey everyone, welcome to the Doctors of Running Virtual Roundtable, where we, three doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and the science to the stuff that we're putting on our feet. Today on the docket is the HOKA ONE ONE, wrong way, Rincon 2. I have the coolest colorway of anyone.
Definitely.
For those of you who are listening on podcast, I have the TK of the Tokyo colorway, whereas they have the normal one. But they're the same shoe. They just look a little bit different. And we're excited to dive into this shoe today. I am the person with the specs, so I will just dive into those really quick for us. We are looking at, for a men's size 9, 7.7 ounces, and for a women's size 7, 6.5 ounces. So this is maintained the same weight as the previous version, nice and light. It has a 5 millimeter drop. For men's, it's 29 in the heel, 24 in the forefoot, and for women it's 26 in the heel and 21 in the forefoot. The midsole is composed of a full compression EVA throughout. The outsole has some spotty areas of rubber, blown rubber on the outside, and then it's an engineered mesh upper. So that's what we got for specs. Anything else to add?
Just measured them, by the way, I have a size 10, David size 9.5, Nathan size 9, so Nathan's going to have the closest to that listed weight. For a men's size 10, this comes in at 8.2 ounces in what I just measured. So,
great.
Depending on size.
Okay, well, let's start off with talking about the fit. What do you guys think about how this shoe fits? You know, in the heel, the forefoot, what's the upper like? What's the lockdown? All that kind of stuff.
I found the upper is supposed to be the major update, although we'll get into some other areas that I feel like even though they're supposed to be the same, they ended up being different than the first version. Lockdown is okay. It was decent, right? So the upper feels very different than the last version. To me, it was less airy, a little more locked down. So lockdown is definitely better. Runs just a hair narrow in the forefoot for sure, as a lot of Hokas do, with a fairly average to slightly snug fit back to the midfoot and fairly average to maybe a hair wide like a lot of Hokas do in the heel, at least for me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the lockdown's pretty good. I mean, I did 18 miles in trails this morning in them, and I didn't have any slippage or anything, and they did surprisingly well. I'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about ride and stuff. But yeah, the upper, I didn't run in the first one. I've seen and held the first one, and just off of visual aesthetics, like you mentioned, it does seem it's like a little thicker, maybe not quite as airy.
Right.
But like that's a sandwich mesh, right? Isn't that what they call it?
Yeah.
And that hug on the midfoot's a little better, and I think it runs a little wider than the Clifton 6, in my opinion, if we're keeping it within the Hoka line. Because when I would run in the Hoka Clifton 6, I would just get a lot of midfoot irritation in here, and I didn't have any in this one. And then the forefoot, it wasn't wide, but it wasn't exactly that narrow either, like maybe a little bit more narrow than normal, but not enough for me to have any irritation. So I thought the fit was pretty good, relatively thick upper, and then the lockdown kind of helped with the heel there. It's not a great lockdown in the heel, but it's enough.
So. Yeah, I agree with you guys. Pretty relatively minimal upper throughout, which I appreciate in a shoe. I kind of like that. The tongue is really thin as well, in addition to kind of the heel counter is there, but there's not a ton of padding, but I found there was enough. I did find I had to really lace it down a bit through the midfoot. For me, I have a slightly more narrow foot, and even with that, I would say the most relatively narrow part was at the point of the MTP joint, the metatarsophalangeal joint. It's kind of where the big part of the big toe is, where your foot transitions into your toes. That's where I was noticing the most. If there was the most narrow part, I think that would be the relatively most narrow section of the shoe. It didn't. I'll get into more of where I think that might have impacted me a little bit later, but in terms of the fit of the upper, And the lockdown, I just had to, like I said, lace it down a little bit tighter because the heel doesn't have like a ton of hug around the calcaneus, so I had to really snug it up. But it did the job. It's light. I mean, the shoe is super light, and the upper kind of goes in line with that. I have not ran in the first version, so this is my first one as well. But now, moving on from that, let's kind of talk about the ride, and in that, let's talk about speed. What was it like for you guys at different tempos, and what's the ride of the shoe like for you guys?
David, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty smooth. I've been feeling a little beat up this week just because I've had a bump in mileage with the multiple shoe testing going on. And I put these on for the first time late in the week. And I just did an easy day, and I was running a little quicker than I actually thought I was. I felt like the shoe does run pretty light. The 5mm drop feels pretty true. I feel like it's pretty fluid, but it doesn't feel aggressive. Like when you think of like 4 or 5mm drop, you almost think like, oh, I'm about to load my calves. That's not really the case in this shoe. There's plenty of protection and stack on there. So it almost just kind of felt fluid. Like I felt like there was enough protection on there for how light it was that I could kind of smack the ground a little bit. And even this morning when I was running through rocks and stuff, it was okay in terms of the protection on the foot. So it felt like the protection was there. The ride is still a little on the firm side, though. I mean, it's basically like a thick slab of EVA, and that's about it. So it helps keep the weight down, and it helps give you protection, but it does kind of firm up the ride. But some people do like that, having a slightly firmer ride with a little bit of protection and a little bit more ground feel probably than what you would in some other shoes of similar stack. I feel like it might be appreciated. We'll go into durability later, I'm sure. But you can feel the traction a little bit when you start going into like turns and like downhills. But I almost wish that there would be just a little bit more outsole, maybe covering the entirety of the forefoot, and then maybe a little bit more on that posterior lateral heel. Oops, there you go. Because if you see, this is only at like 25 miles, and I've like shredded through a decent amount of it. So if they just extended it, even just like one panel, like if it was just like, boop, like I feel like that would protect the shoe a little bit more. And maybe make that a little bit more smooth and grippy too. I didn't feel like I was going to slip out at any moment, but you also don't get much of a pull from the road or from the dirt when all of it's exposed, So.
Yeah. What about you, Matt?
I found, because I think I'm the only one of the group that's running the first version. So
right.
I found this ride to be firmer than previous and stiffer. So I definitely noticed that in the first couple runs is that transition. I got off that really quick, which was somewhat nice. We'll talk about the durability stuff later, which I am the destroyer, so you can already see that happening. Definitely firmer. And although it is light, to me, it didn't feel like the lightest ride, and that might be just because there's a good amount of shoe there. So for those who like a lot of shoe but want a lighter ride, this might work very well. For someone like me, it just feels heavier than it rides. But it did do well with things like strides, a little up-tempo work, just because of the stiffer and firmer ride. So that does feel good. Like David said, it's a lower drop, as most Hokas are, but I really don't feel it as someone who's a little sensitive to that right now. I didn't feel it at all. I think just because of this, the rocker is so pronounced that it just rolls you through that. So overall, Ridewood's pretty good. The wider outsole and sole is decently stable. The sidewalls are decent. So overall, like a somewhat stable ride, a firmer ride, a little faster transition, but not the lightest. So definitely more on the lightweight trainer side of things, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you in some ways and have a little bit different experience in some other. Again, I didn't run in the first, so I'm not comparing to anything. So that does make a difference because you know what the old one felt like. I enjoyed the ride of the shoe. I think it's unique to have a pretty high stack at such a lightweight. That's a relatively unique thing, and it's a pretty consistent ride. I agree with you guys that the drop doesn't feel aggressive, and I just think Hoka does a good job with their heel bevels. So for people like me who are striking back there, it's always smooth. Something I've been noticing about this shoe, I'll try to describe it for those of you who are listening on podcasts. If you look here at the shoe, there's a piece of foam that comes in that's got some kind of lined texture to it. And when you just compress the foam that is in the heel that's below that, that textured area doesn't even come in until the midfoot really. That textured area feels a little bit more firm. And so it almost feels like when I'm running too, that there's like this transition from a soft heel and you're landing to a firmer, I agree with you, Matt, like a firmer, more stiff toe off. And what I felt like that did for speed was the shoe didn't necessarily give a lot of propulsion, but the shoe kept up. With whatever I did, the shoe's light enough to keep up, and it has a firm enough forefoot that it's giving a little bit of spring. And so when you push into it, it's not like lagging behind. It's kind of keeping up. But I do think there's a difference in that density between those two foams. And the rocker, they said they refined the rocker of this one a little bit to be a little bit more early stage meta rocker compared to the previous, which is nice. And we can dig into early stage meta rockers a little bit maybe later. But I appreciated the ride of the shoe overall. I think the one thing that I've been noticing with HOKA in general, but definitely this shoe, is that they do put those little bit of sidewalls of EVA. So the stack that you see here on the outside is higher than the footbed on the inside. And I've had a lot of rubbing over my first three runs, pretty pronounced on the inside of the ball of my foot. So I've gotten pretty decent blisters, but that could change as we go on. But I do think that's a function of the sidewall and the fact, like I talked about with the fit, that it's a little bit more narrow in that section. And so I'm just kind of sliding down the sidewall and it's being compressed at the same time. And I think, Matt, you had a similar experience.
I've had the exact same experience where I do like the sidewalls because they do provide just gentle guidance for the foot without needing any additional arch support or things like that. But the problem with a lot of these is that I have the same issue with a lot of Hokas, that I get blistering along, especially the medial side, rarely the lateral, but a lot of that medial, like the first MTP, first toe, Alex, I'll get a lot of blistering there. And sometimes trying to break these in is not the most fun. Know that this gets better with time as your foot adapts to it. But the sidewalls, I feel, are not contoured to the side of the foot. So there's a lot of potential for rubbing there, and you do have to get used to that. So my feet have gotten used to it more, and so that might also be my skin toughening up. But just there's a break-in period, so that's what that means. Yeah,
and it's a really enjoyable, for me, really enjoyable ride. Like it's smooth, and I like firmer shoes. So to have a more maximalist shoe that's a little bit firmer and not so cushioned and soft and like plush, I appreciate that because I feel like I can take it out for speed days when my legs feel a little bit beat up because there is a lot under the foot. I think that's what I like it for the most.
It's got a unique place.
I think it's interesting because it's kind of like the maximalist minimalist shoe.
Yes.
Yeah. It was a maximalist lightweight trainer, right?
Right. Because the Clifton 6 is kind of like the daily trainer, go beat it up and take it through high mileage. Whereas the Rincon is kind of like, you could still do that, but it's more like that performance trainer, lightweight trainer.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. I feel like I could take it for daily miles and then also pick it up a little bit if I have to. So,
how has the durability gone for you guys?
I don't beat up my outsoles. So my outsole looks pretty good. You can't even see anywhere on the exposed foam for me. I haven't beat it up. Right now I've got about 20. So I'm not fully done with my wear testing, but at this point, for me, it looks pretty typical, but I don't beat it up. The foam, the midsole foam looks pretty good. I think in other Hokas that I've worn, I've had earlier creasing of the EVA, which isn't necessarily mean the shoe's dead, but I don't have that yet either. So I'll start it off with a positive note and then let you guys take it from there.
David, why don't you go first?
Actually, it's kind of surprising me in a positive way because 18 of those miles this morning, I mean, they were relatively technical rock trails. So I thought this was going to get chewed up way more than what it actually did. I've got about 25 miles on them so far. Now, there is more wear than what I would normally anticipate for 25 miles. But the abrasion actually, I don't think is that horrible. I mean, no more than what a rock would normally chew up an outsole with. There's not a whole lot of like durable rubber outsole, or I don't know if it's blown rubber or not, but I have a feeling that the Destroyer probably has come close to blowing through it already. There's not a whole lot through there. So even on the parts that aren't exposed, it's like just enough to kind of give you a little bit of traction and extend the life of the shoe just a little bit, but it's not the most durable shoe in the world by any means.
So I think I miscalculated. I actually have the least number of miles of the group. So I think I have somewhere between 18 to 20. And I'm definitely chewing through it both at the forefoot and the heel. That's the you need to know going into this, there's not a ton of outsole rubber, and that's not the point, right? The point is to create a lightweight shoe with a large stack height. So just know that. Just know for those of us that destroy shoes, this may not be the greatest option for you. If you're very light on your feet like David or Nathan, and you don't get a lot of outsole wear, you'll be totally fine. But
yeah,
I am probably not going to get a ton of miles out of these.
This is a shoe I'm excited to keep this in my rotation, to be honest. Once my foot adapts from the blistering, which I know it will, like I said, I really like it for days that I want to, like if I'm just still training, I want to get some speed in there, but the legs feel a little bit beat up. It's a nice amount of cushion. I like the slightly firmer ride. Stiffer forefoot for me, I appreciate on those days, and it just keeps up with what I'm doing, but it's forgiving enough. So, and since I don't blow through my rubber, I should be okay for a long time.
Me, not so much.
Yeah,
what do you guys think?
Earlier too, when I was saying like a potential recommendation, the goal of the shoe isn't to have a full contact outsole. So that's why on that posterior lateral heel, like if you could put yours up, Klein, you see how there's a lot of wear like right in here. And like if you just added one little panel, that could extend the life a lot, you know? And then even in the forefoot, like right there, as you're toeing off, that's not that much more weight to add if you just go full forefoot.
That's where you see.
I don't think that'd be a bad option. I mean, maybe you add what, 0.1, 0.2 of an ounce, maybe?
At most, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good recommendation.
Yeah.
I agree. What do you guys think of stability for this guy?
Pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah, go for it, David.
Sorry. I actually thought it was pretty good. Yeah. Like the sidewalls, I think actually help a little bit. I know you guys got a little irritated by them. I was actually surprised I didn't, to be completely honest. But it helps kind of guide the foot there. The bevel's good. You kind of get a good initial contact. It's relatively smooth through the midfoot with that nice lockdown. And then you get a little bit of a firmer toe off, and it's kind of it's a pretty smooth ride, and the firmer ride also helps contribute to that stability a little bit as well. And then you have a tiny, tiny little bit of flare, but not a whole lot. But I think it's more the sidewalls than anything that kind of just help guide it a little bit.
Yep.
Totally agreed on that the stability is actually pretty good. The sidewalls do act like a very gentle guide for the foot. If you need high stability, it's obviously not going to be enough, but there's a lot of inherent stability there just based on the rocker, just based on the sidewalls. They did a decent job with that. Once you can get over your foot doesn't match exactly to the sidewalls, you may get a little rubbing, but once you get over that, it's pretty decent. I'm impressed. But HOKA usually does that decently.
Yeah, definitely. Especially for high stack shoes, they add in enough stability elements to offset some of that, which is nice.
And that wide midsole outsole is super important for that. So
yeah. One quick thought that I had, this is unrelated to this stuff, but just thinking about early stage meta rockers, thinking about specific patient populations or people who have pain ankle conditions, one thing you can consider, when you're looking at rocker soles, you have early stage meta rockers and you have early stage rockers and late stage rockers. They call theirs the meta rocker in HOKA, but like a later stage rocker would be something like the Glide Ride, ASICS Glide Ride. That's way more towards the forefoot. And again, what they're trying to do, there's 3 rockers in the gait cycle. There's the heel rocker, the ankle rocker, and the forefoot rocker. And we have stuff on our website that kind of run through that. And maybe we'll do a roundtable on something with this. But just really quick, if you know that you have an ankle condition, disclaimer, this is not medical advice. If you have a condition, you should seek blah, blah, blah. Okay, disclaimer done. But if you have...
professional, right, if you are having pain, right?
Yeah.
Medical condition, podiatrist.
But you could consider, if you have an early stage meta rocker, early stage would mean that it's positioned more towards the heel than it is towards the toes. So if you have an early stage meta rocker, that's going to start acting earlier during the gait cycle, which means it's going to decrease the demand on the ankle rocker, which means you, in theory, should move into less dorsiflexion, which means that you should put less demand on the anterior or front side of the talar dome. The talar dome is we sit right on top of the talus, and that's kind of our weight-bearing bone in the foot. And if you know that you have anterior talar dome, oh my gosh, what's the word?
Impingement?
Like impingement.
Yeah, impingement, or even defects, like osteochondral defects.
Right.
Earlier stage meta rockers, one of the goals could be to decrease the demand or compression on the front side of the talus. So that I do appreciate that as an option when it comes to HOKA. Like when I have people come into the clinic and they're looking for something in that realm, if we can't, if we don't want to go do something custom and trying to get something put on, even just for walking, I have them at least try a HOKA, go to the store and see what it feels like to walk around. And this has that, and a lot of their other shoes do. But I think that's one of the non-running specific things, but it's just a mechanics change that happens with meta rockers. And early stage can be good for the anterior talar dome.
I definitely agree with Nathan that we are not sponsored by HOKA. We are not, they send us some shoes for review, but we are not affiliated with them. I do the same thing where a lot of acute foot and ankle injuries, I will suggest something like this because we know from the research that these maximalist and rocker designs really offload the foot, especially forefoot area. A lot of times these heel bevels can really unload the heel, the calcaneus, the midfoot. Can do a good job with this stuff. So either those with an acute injury, it's kind of not that different from some of those boots, but however, it still allows them to be pretty mobile and still get some mobility. The other population is your older population that's losing their mobility, say, especially the MTP joints, right? That losing that extension. You need, for walking alone, for normal, you need at least 60 degrees of extension at those toe joints. Not a lot of people have that. That's where the toe spring we talk about, right? The late stage meta rocker, that's what that really helps with, of going, hey, now you don't need to extend, you can just roll off that. So that's where it's super helpful. And I suggest these frequently for people that either, their prognosis is not very good in terms of being able to make a change because they may have gone far enough down that road. It's like, hey, this joint is not going to change a lot, right? And we want to try a non-surgical option. These do very well for that. And as Nathan mentioned, that early stage meta rocker works very well for the talocrural issues, right? Is those people who have zero dorsiflexion and that ain't coming back, or they're not willing to work on it, or they're considering surgical stuff. Like, this is a much better conservative treatment to think about. And HOKA tends to do that well. There's some other companies that are doing similar things, but are not quite there. ASICS is close, but they're like, Nathan's going to be the expert on that since he's the only one that's really tried those shoes so far, from ASICS, the Glide Ride, and stuff like that. From what I understand, it's much later, so you're going to that's going to benefit those with metatarsal issues, not as much. So
it's very, very late. I mean, you feel it in toe off. I mean, it's great. It's just different, very different.
Yeah. Very good option. Again, we know these rocker shoes and maximalist shoes, whether it's the Vaporfly, whether it's HOKA, they tend to offload the ankle joints. We are not sure where that force goes. A lot of times there is some evidence to suggest it starts going more into the knee and the hip, which isn't a bad thing. And I have actually utilized some of these maximalist shoes to retrain gait and without making people over-focus on it. So if I want to help people utilize a hip-dominant movement strategy, sometimes these kind of shoes can help.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to wear them forever, right? But kind of like this might be a good option for right now while you're training and shifting.
Right. Like for an acute offloading.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking too. Like even just people with stiff ankles in general, like having a little bit of pinching in that talar dome, or decreased great toe extension, but also like say someone who's like a more stable post-op condition as well, where there's not as much swelling necessarily. I don't think this would be the greatest if you have swelling, but say it's reduced and you're just having some problems with that dorsiflexion. Might not be a bad option too to just kind of help get that gait cycle a little bit more fluid, at least in those like months, like 2 to 4-ish, depending on how they're doing.
Yeah. So Matt, bring us in. What's our if this shoe were a blank, what would it be and why? We haven't heard this yet, so
yeah, they put me on the spot. They know this is the biggest struggle I have every time is to not just answer this question. Now I have to go, what is the question? So if this shoe was a zoo animal, what would it be?
Zoo animal?
Yes.
All right.
I think I got it.
I'm just going to say what popped into my head first, and I'm going to say an otter. Have you guys ever seen otters at the zoo?
Yes.
Those things are slick. They're awesome. Now that I'm starting, I got to figure out why I think an otter. It's just what came into my head. I wanted to pick something that, like otters aren't this, scrawny pushover type animal. But they're smooth. And they are pretty fast, especially in the water. Not that this shoe runs fast in the water, but there's something about them. They're thick bodied, but they're not. I don't know, but they're not like the fattest animal you'll see. So they're the minimalist of the maximal. That's not even true, and they're pretty smooth in the water. This is your otter.
Like a triathlete, which the Rincons have been showing up at a good number of a lot of the triathlons, right? It's a popular triathlon shoe. So
that's why I said otter. Yes.
All right, David, your turn.
So mine has a giant plot hole through it, but mine's also a water animal. Mine's actually the hippo.
Oh.
Now hippos are very heavy. This is not very heavy. However, they're very chunky, but they're also very, very fast for their size. And
I like that.
They're more agile than people give them credit for. So aside from the actual weight of the hippo, it's thick. It's not the most durable. So I mean, a hippo could take a hit. I don't know how much it's big, but like it's not gonna bend or break. It's a pretty dang good. You can use it for daily training if you had to. Durable enough, and it runs lighter than what it looks. So I'm going with the hippo.
Like it.
I had those both go through my head prior, and I'll be honest, I still don't. Now that you guys have taken them, I have no idea.
That's amazing.
Yeah, because I thought like hippo, but again, because they can move very fast. I had the wonderful fortune of working for those of you in Oregon listening to this, I was an Oregon zoo teen back in the day, so I had the wonderful working at the Oregon Zoo. It was phenomenal. Shout out to that program. Those guys are awesome. So I got to go all over. Shout out to all the keepers and the vets that were nice enough to talk to me and show me the behind the scenes stuff. So that was very cool. Support them best you can. The otters are intense. They are very fast. And I don't know. They're not thick though. Right? They're super sleek. They're muscular. If you put your hand if you put your hand near them, they will take your fingers off. The jaws are incredible. Not that I ever did that, and not that they're mean, but they're really strong. So I don't know. I feel like I got to save the otter for something else. Are we going to use this question again?
No.
All right, fine. I'm gonna double up with Nathan saying just based on the color that an otter I agree with. Although I also agree with David, so I might go halfway between just because it can move. It felt really good, decent for strides. It's not going to be my go-to race shoe. It's not. I've used it for a long run. It actually did super well. I've used it for a little up-tempo work. It works well, and that's its purpose. It's a lightweight trainer. It's not the fastest, but it's got a nice firm ride that will roll you forward. So based on – I'm trying to make a reference here to the fact that the otters can crack stuff on their stomach with a rock. I got nothing. Please, let's move on.
We'll take that as a fun fact.
Yes.
So do you guys have any final thoughts? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up.
I agree with David. I would like them. I know this is not the purpose, but I would like them to just add a little bit more outsole rubber. Just not the whole thing, just in a couple of those high wear areas, just to extend the life of the shoe a little bit. It's already good, right? There's enough midsole here that even when you do chew through it, there's still plenty of life there. But I think you might be able to get just a little bit more. This is already a great deal for a Hoka. It's already on I don't want to say it's a cheap shoe, but it's on the less expensive end of a lot of Hokas. So it's a great deal for somebody who wants a lightweight daily trainer, but you could just add a couple more of this stuff. The other thing is I would love if they could try to contour those sidewalls a little bit more. And I don't mean this as an insult, but it does feel like running in a shoebox the first couple miles. But that's Hoka tends to have that for me. Not everybody has that experience. Then it breaks in and it feels great. But I would suggest seeing if you can contour that just a little bit more to the foot, which is hard given the variety of foot shapes. What do you guys think?
That's the first time Matt and I agree completely.
Also, I didn't realize they glued in.
For the pull tab enthusiasts, you got an awesome one.
Totally.
I've never used it, but it's there.
Great. I think I'll wrap.
Did you have any comments?
Oh, what I was actually going to say was, for a lightweight trainer for $115, they didn't increase the price. That's really a nice thing that they, I mean, I don't know if that's a courtesy to the people, but that is a great thing. And we'll take it. It's kind of like Reebok with the Forever Float Ride Energy. Like that shoe took off and they didn't increase the price for version 2. And they did make some nice updates. So for them not to increase the price here, I think it was a nice move by Hoka. And that is just one factor. But, yeah, I enjoyed the shoe.
I would say it's definitely worth the $115. Like we agree that we like it. It's lightweight. It's got a great ride. There is a little breaking in that's required. But for a lightweight trainer, this is a pretty good shoe.
And for a lot of folks, having a shoe that's this light that they can train in will be perfect for your 5Ks and your 10Ks and your half marathons. Like exactly. It's for the majority of people, it'll be just fine. Not the majority of people don't need an elite racing shoe, and so this could be a great option for something that could do it all for you.
Totally agree.
Also, it smelled pretty well. I know Klein likes to look into that a little bit.
Anyway,
so it always is a question of how long the nice shoe smell is going to last.
My last thoughts, and then I'm going to sign us off here. I came prepped with for my podcast listeners. Came prepped with my brewer hat and my Badger water bottle, and because David always wears some offensive team. He just continues to wear that, like this star. I don't understand.
Yeah,
but I came prepped. Anyway, there are our thoughts on the art, the science behind putting the HOKA ONE ONE Rincon on your feet. For more information, you can go to our website at doctorsofrunning.com. Please subscribe to our podcast or YouTube channel, as well as checking out the rest of the information on our website. Take care, y'all.